Hi everyone, welcome to the MrpTech Podcast. This is episode 73. My name is Matt, and I'm from mrptechreviews.com. If you'd like to check out the previous episodes of this podcast, go over to mrptechreviews.com/podcast. You can find all the old episodes and the RSS feed link to subscribe and get the episodes downloaded directly to your devices without much thought. So go ahead and subscribe to that RSS feed. We'd love to have you listening here every week. For those of you who have been listening over the last several weeks, thanks again for doing that. It's great to hear from you from time to time. I'm getting some feedback through various sources, through the YouTube channel, through email, and always great to hear comments on the podcast itself. Keep those coming in. This week, jumping right in, I'd like to talk about and review the latest release of Ubuntu 17.10. And I've been talking about this for the last few weeks, sort of gearing up in excitement, because as a Linux advocate, Ubuntu is where I started. Ubuntu is how I got involved with Linux. Ubuntu is how I learned about open source, the open source philosophy. And it's sort of something that I get excited about every 6 months when Ubuntu drops a new release. I'm not sure why I get excited about it. I guess it's interesting to see such an active release cycle. 6 months isn't a whole lot of time. And it's always fun to see what they come up with, what they've been doing, what they've been working on, and the iterations and how they have been improved release after release. Now, going back, one of my favorite releases of Ubuntu was Ubuntu 10.04. It was a long-term release, and I believe the sort of theming back then was a purplish theme. And after Ubuntu 10.04 came out, the next release after that was Ubuntu 10.10, where they advertised the perfect 10, the perfect operating system, and it was pretty solid. It was a great release, but unfortunately, it was their last release of the GNOME 2 desktop. And around that time, there was a lot of changes happening. Ubuntu had its Ubuntu Remix desktop, Netbook Remix desktop, that was specifically for smaller screens. Later became known as the Unity desktop. And that desktop became default in Ubuntu 11.04, and it was very new. Many people didn't like it. It needed some improvement. But this was not a long-term release, and it was something that they were going to iterate on after release after release. And so this was the sort of development cycle for Ubuntu, and they sort of developed it, and by the time the next long-term release, Ubuntu 12.04, came out, Ubuntu was pretty solid. It had its issues, but it was much better than when it first came out. And over the next few years, development came, work started on on Unity 8 and with combination of Mir as well, and they plugged away at this whole idea about convergence and wanting to be able to combine the mobile platform and the desktop platform into one seamless experience. And I thought the idea of that was really kind of awesome. It was something that not many other companies out there were doing at the time. Microsoft has taken it into development over the last few years. Apple's doing its own sort of integration of combining mobile and desktop in certain aspects, but nobody really tried to do an all-in-one encompassing release that was anywhere near what Canonical was coming up with. And there was a lot of great ideas that cropped up and didn't really pan out. There was Ubuntu for Android that came up and then sort of disappeared. And they really were going in the mobile direction for quite a few years. Many people got angry with that because they just wanted their desktop to improve. They did not want the mobile experience. And many of these ideas showed working prototypes that eventually the ideas were scrapped along the way. And Unity started getting some more attention. And then the unexpected happened, that Canonical decided that they were going to abandon their Unity desktop and return to the GNOME desktop. And that's what really got me excited. I had used Ubuntu. I tried the Unity desktop. I didn't like it, but I used it for a while. It made me want to distro hop for a while. So I hopped around for a lot of different, through a lot of different Linux distros. I learned a lot in the process, which is actually kind of cool. I would try Fedora and the RPM distros. I would try Linux Mint and the Cinnamon desktop, going back through variations of the Mate desktop, things like Ubuntu with KDE, and I didn't really know where I wanted to end up. And when all was said and done, I sort of always kept coming back to the GNOME desktop. Now, I know those of you out there, you listen and you have your own preferences. This is not a what's better, what's not better, what's good, what's terrible, that type of thing. My preference has always been GNOME. I really like GNOME. It's a good workflow for me. I really liked GNOME 3 when it came out, and I have really loved all the different improvements with GNOME 3 that have been coming over the last several years when it's really started to get polished. So now we've come full circle, and GNOME is now coming back to Ubuntu. A few years ago, there was a Ubuntu derivative that was called Ubuntu GNOME that came out. I never really gave it a shot. I never really tried it out because I was pretty good. I settled into Arch Linux and Antergos, and I sort of just stopped distro hopping for a little while. So this week when I pulled out the Ubuntu 17.10 beta and started working on it, giving it a shot, giving it its run through, I was really excited to go back to Ubuntu and see what the improvements have been with this distro over the last 6 months. With that said, I think the GNOME desktop looks beautiful with Ubuntu. I like what they're doing with the GNOME desktop. It's not a stock GNOME desktop. They have taken the dash to dock extension for GNOME and turned it into an Ubuntu extension. It's very similar to the Unity panel, the side panel that you had before, but with all the GNOME features added in. So let's talk about some of those new features. So first of all, this release is called Artful Aardvark. They're back to the letter A's. They made it all the way through the alphabet and working their way back from the beginning again. The names, I really could care less what the names are as long as things are improving. And having GNOME right off the bat is the biggest improvement I think they could have done. Some people like Unity. I believe Unity is still going to be around, the desktop itself. It's just not under development by Canonical. And one of the things that I liked about GNOME in particular is it's a little easier with things like GDM to change your login screen, change your backgrounds, and Ubuntu is always difficult with LDM for some reason of changing the login screen, just little things like that. This one happens to be released with GNOME 3.26, and one of the things that I did not know until looking into it is that it's shipping with the Wayland display server. So they have also dropped Mira, it looks like. Xorg is still available. If you're having some trouble with older applications, you can log out and log back in with the X display server. But Wayland is shipping by default on that, and I thought that was great. I know Fedora has been doing that for a while. And the biggest change is changing from the login of LightDM to GDM. I always preferred the GNOME Display Manager, so that makes me happy. Those of you who like LightDM, that might be a reason not to stick with it. But I've always liked the GNOME Display Manager for the login screen. There are lots of other smaller changes that as far as menus and what buttons are placed where. I don't really want to get into all that in this episode. We're all aware in the past the buttons have changed, a big controversy. I don't really care about any of that stuff at this point in time. But what I will talk to you about, what I thought was really cool, booting up the live environment. Instantly, as soon as I tried the live environment, network printers were discovered. Any printers that I had in my network automatically discovered and ready to go. I'm not sure what made that happen. I've never had that happen with Ubuntu before, but instantly my printers were ready to go. I thought that was awesome. It happened on multiple computers and multiple different networks. So that was a great kind of experience that I wasn't expecting. Also with this release, better Bluetooth integration. Changing audio sources is going to be a little easier for you. But you when it comes to that, I've always preferred to install things like GNOME Tweak and the PAVU volume control for like HDMI connections and that type of thing. But just overall minor improvements all around. It's got the Linux kernel 4.13 that are installed, and just one of the other great things is the HD high DPI support. The high DPI support is a relief to finally see. It's been not so great in the past. I've got one computer with high resolution monitor, and Ubuntu in particular never really looked great on it. Looks pretty good on it, and I have to change a few things. But for the most part, the high DPI support is much, much better. If you're using a 32-bit Ubuntu install, there is no image for 32-bit Ubuntu 17.10. But if you are using an older version of Ubuntu, you can upgrade to the latest version in 32-bit. I thought that was kind of strange. I understand we're trying to get away from 32-bit. Most machines are 64-bit at this point in time. So it makes sense. That's not really a complaint on my part. Seem to be stepping away from 32-bit. Most distros are doing that. There are older distros. There are other boutique distros and unique distros with certain circumstances that are still shipping 32-bit. Those are going to be around for a while. But Ubuntu seems to be going away from 32-bit. And many will follow because they have to, because many Linux distros are based off Ubuntu. One of the things that I haven't had a lot of time checking out is the Software Center at this point in time. I briefly took a look at it, got distracted and stepped away from it. But the Software Center I haven't used in probably 2 or 3 releases. It's looking pretty good. Still not perfect. And as far as I remember, they were stepping away from the Ubuntu Software Center at some point in time, and maybe they're going to consider adding something like GNOME software. Maybe they've already done that. Maybe they haven't. Like I said, I haven't had a whole lot of chance to take a look at that point just yet. So, what is Ubuntu good for, in my opinion? Ubuntu is a great starting point for anybody who wants to get into Linux. It's very easy to install. Ubuntu distros are super easy to install. There are several different flavors of Ubuntu, and I don't know all of them off the top of my head. Each offering a different desktop environment. So you have Ubuntu standard, you have Kubuntu, Ubuntu Mate, and many others that are just put a different spin on Ubuntu for specific needs and circumstances, desktop environments, production environments, that type of thing. Some are official flavors that are supported by Ubuntu. Some are unofficial flavors that do not get Ubuntu support, but are still based off Ubuntu in general. Ubuntu is great for students wanting to try Linux for the first time, learning about Linux for the first time. It doesn't let you get under the hood a whole lot. So it's good for a really stable system, especially if you're using a long-term support like Ubuntu 16.04. The next long-term support for Ubuntu is going to be 18.04. They release every 2 years. And in the past, long-term supports were supported for 5 years. That may be even increasing soon to another year past that because of new changes to the long-term supports for the Linux kernels. So I think that's pretty awesome. for somebody who just wants a computer and doesn't want to mess with it very much. Something you want to be stable and rock solid and secure. So the first thing that I always do after I install Ubuntu, make sure you have all your updates. Install all your graphics drivers that you need, or proprietary drivers like Wi-Fi drivers. If you have certain Wi-Fi cards, you can go under additional software or additional drivers and install that. And like I said earlier, I always install the GNOME Tweak tool. There's some cool features in GNOME Tweak that I always enjoy changing to my preferences. The standard theme for Ubuntu never has impressed me much. I just don't like the orange theme that they have, and the default wallpapers have just always been terrible. In this case, some of the other wallpapers that are included in this release actually are quite nice. But the default wallpaper, I'm so tired of it. It changes very subtly from release to release, and it's time to move on to something a little different, hopefully by the next release. But the good thing about that is you can change the themes. You can do whatever you want in Linux, and that's what's really where it's at. Make sure you have your third-party codecs installed, so you can listen to YouTube videos, play MP3s and MP4s, things like that. The one thing I noticed that has been included in GNOME recently is the night shift, and to tell you a little bit about what's been going on with me recently. Being outside all summer, my eyes at the end of the summer were so dry. My eyes started watering. One of my eyes started watering. I spent a couple of weeks really doing a lot of schoolwork and really staring at computers quite a bit. And I'm talking hours, 8 hours, 9 hours of getting work done. And my eyes were really dried out. They were really irritated. And I actually hurt one of my eyes just recently, and had to take some time off from some screens in general, from eye strain, and it's always been a problem for me. But I really did myself in this time. And when I saw Night Shift, I know there's other things I could have downloaded before, but just having a toggle switch for Night Shift is awesome to see in something like GNOME. I know I could have installed other software in the past, but I'm lazy and I never think of it, and I just want to sit down and do work. And then I get distracted and I realize it's an hour later by the time that happens, and my eyes are itchy and red, and just not feeling pleasant. So I'm glad that things like Night Shift are included in GNOME at this point in time, or the Nightlight, whatever you want to call it. It's just a nice little touch that's added in Ubuntu. I also noticed it was in Antergos in my latest update, and maybe I just haven't noticed it in a little while. I always like to see just little things like that added. Really makes for some polish. I always enjoy how Ubuntu is easy to install software. It's PPAs are available if you need it. If you know what you're doing, you're not going to bork your system. But if you add 1 million PPAs, your chances of something happening, getting screwed up, increases every single time. But it's Ubuntu is sort of always my go back to for if I want something stable and rock solid without much fuss. Does that mean I'm going to install Ubuntu on my primary machines? I don't think so. I love Ubuntu. I love everything that they do. I love this latest release. It's only going to get better between now and 18.04. I have just gone with a more bleeding edge Linux distro. I like the newer software. And knock on wood, I haven't gotten burned a whole lot with the bleeding edge things. But every once in a while, as I'm getting ready for production of some kind, and I'm using Linux machines in production, I always have that thought in the back of my mind: is this going to be when I get burned? Is this going to be when I get burned? And last month it almost happened where I was starting a live stream for a concert, and I didn't have my Plex hard drive plugged in, and my computer went into an emergency mode, and luckily I knew enough to figure that out and fixed it. But am I going to bork an update right before a big event? So I've sort of timed my updating after big events, and just kind of worked around the bleeding edge things. And usually I don't run into too many problems with things like Arch Linux. So if I ever need to, though, Ubuntu is just a really quick download away, and then I'm up and running within 10 or 15 minutes. And that's what I love about Linux. I tried to update Windows 10 just recently, and it took hours to update, restart after restart. Linux is just quick and easy, and it's not much effort once you learn how to install and get your system up and running the way you like it. You can install your software all at once and just have a ready-to-use system very, very quickly. You can download your favorite apps. Everything's free. And that the old slogan for Ubuntu, Linux for human beings. I just love that Ubuntu philosophy from South Africa. I think that's really awesome. I know Ubuntu is developed by a company, but I like that philosophy. I like the fact that is there. It's a Linux for everybody. And then you can sort of branch off and experiment with other things and maybe leave Ubuntu for a while and come back. But having something there that everybody else develops off of is pretty awesome. And Ubuntu is developed from Debian, so it's like I said, and these are the reasons why I get excited for the latest Ubuntu releases, because lots of great things come from it. So next month, Linux Mint will be coming out with their latest release and so on. So much happens about it. There's so much to talk about. I'm leaving out so many different details as we talk about this. So what do you think of Ubuntu 17.10? Have you given it a shot? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Let me know. You go over to mrptechreviews.com and hit the contact button, and that'll send me a message, and I'll get right back to you. I'd love to hear what you think. If you completely disagree with me and you think Ubuntu 17.10 is a piece of junk, let me know. I'd be glad to talk it over with you, and just hear more and more from my listeners. Got lots of comments this week. I'm not going to read them on the show because I didn't get quite into it yet. Next week, I'd like to get back into some Chromebook topics. I've got a few things I'd like to talk to you all about. I'm going to save that for then. And give me ideas for show topics. I'd always love anybody who'd like to learn if this podcast is useful for you. Let me know what you want to learn about, and we'll talk it up. We'll bring it up in this podcast. If you really like this show and you want to support me, you can go over to mrptechreviews.com, hit the donate button. What that does, that'll allow me to review products, try products, buy products that will that I can talk about and bring back more interesting things into this show. As always, too, go over to podnuts.com, and listen to all the shows on Podnuts networks. Those hosts on the network, they know what they're doing. They're great hosts. Lots of great information on every single episode on all of their shows. Support that network as well. I think I'm subscribed to just about every show on the network, and always am excited to see new shows that are being released on a weekly basis, pretty much. And it's always great to see what other people are doing for projects and projects that I can work on in the future, coming up with some ideas on my own. And it's pretty neat being a part of something like that. So always check out the Podnuts website and maybe give them some support as well. Thanks so much for listening, guys. We will see you next week, and hit that contact button.